What if the world was inclusive? What if all human difference was celebrated in all of its many forms, varieties, and abilities? What if our built environment could adapt dynamically to humans' needs of all sorts? Barriers fell away and possibilities abound. What if disability left our language and what we're left with is people? My name is Maurice Mizzle. I'm a white, middle-aging male seated at my desk wearing a blue short-sleeve shirt and admitting that I'm balding. I'm also an industry fellow and resident foresight strategist with Griffith University, working within the most incredible alliance, Griffith University Reimagining Disability, where research is done differently from the inside out. It starts with those with lived experiences, triggering groundbreaking research around their needs and wants. The attachment to these of the best minds and practice researchers who go on a quest through Griffith's many disciplines and departments, assembling the best minds, thoughts, and activities across all of Griffith's landscapes, attaching to them an incredible external community of like-minded, passionate, disability and broader community advocates, industry, governments, and citizen scientists who collectively are imagining the what if of disability. It's a research model that allows us to dream boldly, imagine audaciously, and in time, answer some of disability's biggest what if questions. In this episode of What If, I'm joined in conversation by one of Griffith Inclusive Futures' marvellous Engagement Council members, as we chat about her life, her passion, and her what-ifs of future disability dreams. To the world, Lisa Cox is known as a multi-awarded writer, presenter, and consultant based in Australia. She's also the author of 2 books, a disability advocate, and an ambassador for numerous organisations, including the organisation that brings us together today, which is Griffith University, Inclusive Futures Reimagining Disability. Her work has been published nationally and internationally for publications including The Huff and the Sydney Morning Herald. And she is the winner of many awards, including most recently, the 2022 Queensland Excellence in Women's Leadership. Today, she joins us in conversation as we join her on her mission to muse, educate, and challenge. Thank you firstly so much for joining me today. I want to ask you, as in awe as I am of the work that you've done and who you are, and we'll come to discover that over the next little while and discover it. Who's the Lisa Cox that your family knows?
The Lisa Cox that my family knows is still the same annoying, opinionated person that I was over 17 years or nearly 17 years ago. I've had my disabilities now almost 17 years, and I'm still the same person. Physically, I'm very different, but pre-disability and post-disability, things haven't changed, or I haven't changed that much. Even though physically I'm completely different, my outlook on life has certainly changed, and I'd be lying if I said that I've stayed completely the same. But a lot of things in terms of my values have changed the same. So I'm still the same driven type A pain in the ass that I always was. Sorry, I can swear, can't I? I should have asked that before.
Oh, absolutely. It's only between friends.
Okay.
And it's so descriptive. How could I not allow? And we're grateful that you are, by the way, because without that, we wouldn't have the conversation we're having today. You know, I love your motto, which is #because why not? It challenges the stereotypes of disability. As somebody without a disability, it challenges those stereotypes that I feel many people have, where it is a conversation of having less and facing diminishing possibilities. With your work and with your motto and your look on the world, I think you give us an insight into somebody of abundance, somebody that sees possibility, somebody that sees opportunity, and somebody that sees the world as open and available to them. So we're currently celebrating International Day of People with Disability. Tell me, what does this day mean for you?
It's, for me personally, it's a day to celebrate how far we've come and how far the disability community has come. For me, how far the things I've achieved personally, how far my friends with disabilities have come personally, but also to recognise how far we still have to go, and projects that I'm working on to achieve that, what still needs to be done, but to really celebrate what we have achieved, even though it is only one day of the year. As everybody with disabilities will appreciate, it's 365 days of the year. So everybody thinking that it's just that one day of the year that we can all get on board, it really is a 365 day of the year thing that we need to recognise.
It absolutely is. It's like Mother's Day and Father's Day in that sense. It kind of galvanises us. It gives us a reason on a particular day to think more, do more, and hope more. But you're right. It's an everyday activity. It
is. It's a lot of awareness days, I suppose. I've spoken about this before. A lot of awareness days, whether it's Mental Health Day or Mother's Day, Father's Day, everything. It is something we need to be conscious of every day, and that's why I like to think of December 3rd as a celebration. It is a day to celebrate, recognise and honour everything we have achieved throughout the year. There have been some enormous achievements this year that I'm aware of in Australia, particularly where we live, and around the world, but there are every year. So this year I'll be taking stock of those, some friends of mine who have done enormous things, some really, really great things. So we should all be doing that every year.
So share with us some of those examples, some of the things that will take particular pride on that
day. My friend Carol Taylor, who's the world's first quadriplegic designer. She is also the lead designer for the adaptive label Christina Stevens. They did a runway show at Australian Fashion Week, and that was really, really incredible to see. And some of my other friends have also just done launched podcasts and written articles and other things like that. So it's been really good to see some of their achievements as well.
It has. I mean, as you say, there's been lots of achievements. It's also, I think, even more laudable because of the year that we've all had, the 2 years that we've had. I mean, it comes on the back of some incredible hardships that everyone has faced. Disability as well, of course, with its own take and its own needs out of the last 2 years. But to sit here and celebrate on top of that.
It has been really difficult, and I felt really awkward last year because I know that some really great things happened last year, but it also was a complete shit show last year with COVID for everybody, not just the disability sector, but it hit a lot of people, including myself in the disability sector, really, really hard. And to say, let's all celebrate when we were in such an awkward situation with everything that happened did feel really, really challenging. So I do appreciate what you're saying, that on one hand where we are celebrating when there are so many tragedies happening with COVID, and there is a really fine, it is really, really hard to balance sometimes. And I do often struggle with that yes, I am trying to celebrate what's happening, but I also recognise that there is a lot of really, really difficult stuff happening at the same time. And my friend is in ICU right now and all of these other things. And I'm well aware that there is a lot of terrible, terrible stuff happening in the disability community. So balancing that with the positive things that are happening as well. It's certainly not a case of let's just forget about what's happening. It's not like that at all.
I think it's always a matter of having a joyful soul, that even in times of hardship, we need, even if it's a kernel, something that's joyful, something that we can look forward to, something that gives us that spirit. I mean, again, back to your hashtag, because, why not?
Yeah.
And for me, regardless of who we are, regardless of what it is we're going through, regardless of what our life looks like, we need some North Star. We need something that gives us that joyful soul. So I think days like this do so much more than that. And I don't think we ever have to apologize, even in the greatest midst of tragedy or uncertainty. To have just that glimmer of hope, I think, is human. And in fact, what we should be having. It's what gets me up every morning, even if I can't quite figure out what the purpose is, just being joyful and trying to find that. So I want to have a look at the disability landscape at the moment. So how does disability, which directly affects about 18% of Australia's population and indirectly about 80% of Australia's population, how do you think it's perceived, disability, by Australians and global society?
Well, every single person is going to give you a different answer depending on their lived experience, I suppose. If they have a friend or a loved one or whoever it may be in their personal life, and somebody who has absolutely nobody in their life except for maybe the media to tell them what disability means, is unfortunately going to have a terrible view of what disability is all about, because currently the media is not reflecting disability particularly well. And I can speak from lived experience here, because going back 17 years ago, roughly, but even though I had friends and family in my life with disabilities, I also had the media in my life telling me what disability meant. So when I acquired my disabilities at the age of 24, all I knew about disabilities, even though I had my friends and my family telling me, what it would be like, I also had this very, very clear image in my mind of what disability meant from the stereotypes that media had placed there. And what I knew based on that was that I would never have a job, never date again. Life was going to be miserable and over. It was really going to be terrible. And I was really, really upset in hospital. I was swinging between two extremes. On one hand, I was incredibly grateful to be alive. And then I'd swing to the other extreme. I was terribly depressed, because I just thought life with disabilities is just going to be tragic, like it's portrayed to be in the media. Because I had this head full of stereotypes that had been presented to me for 24 years. And I never ever wanted anyone who acquired disabilities, and an enormous amount of people are every year. I never wanted anyone to feel like that ever again, be it someone who acquires disabilities or a parent who is told your child is going to be born with disabilities. I never want a parent to have to think, oh, my child is never going to work, get married, or have these, as many parents have unfortunately come out and said publicly, and that has been reported in the media. I never wanted anyone to have to feel those sorts of emotions. So having the experience that I did working in the media industry, instead of just sitting on Twitter and being part of the problem and, criticizing and being a bit of a shit on Twitter, I thought I can actually go to the media and be part of the solution and work with the media, work with business, work with people who are creating these problems and try and create solutions instead, so that these sorts of things don't have to happen and nobody ever has to feel like I did 17 years ago.
Do you sense that's changing? I mean, I've noticed over the last year or two, I think there is a groundswell understanding or desire to understand the disability sector more by mainstream society. I'm seeing, and it might be because I'm looking for it more than I did before, but I'm now seeing icons. In other words, in ordinary ads for some of our big companies, we're now seeing forms of disability, people with various forms of disability. We're starting, I think, to begin to say that this is, as it always has been and always should have been considered, a part of life. That there are people with all sorts of abilities, inabilities, disabilities. It's what makes humans humans, and so beautiful. But I'm starting to sense from a broader society viewpoint that the conversation around disability is an easier one, not a perfect one, not with language that people quite know how to use yet, but seems to be getting easier for mainstream.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not perfect, but it is progress. So there's definitely work to be done. More brands need to get on board. There's journalists do need to do a few things, but we're getting there. I remember over 10 years ago when I started my business and wanted to speak with businesses and was like, hey guys, we need to, this thing called representation and disability, we need to talk about it. And I had a lot of doors closed in my face and a lot of CEOs, CMOs, and like, what? Disability, advertising? Oh, geez, no, we don't want to see that. Yeah. And had a few awkward conversations and a few offensive conversations, and people, CEOs said to me, we don't want to see that. I'm like, you're talking about me, what, as in disabled people like me. And but now over 10 years on, they're the ones, or people like them are the ones knocking on my door, or contacting me, or people who work for me and saying, can you come and speak to us about how to do that thing you were talking about? And I don't know what changed, or I have a few feelings about what may have changed, but it's...
So share those with us. What do you think's changed?
There have been a few cultural changes, like Black Lives Matter, for example. I've heard different commentators talk about how really big cultural changes, like as absolutely horrible as Black Lives Matter was, that was a huge change in a huge moment in time where it was put on the public agenda that the world needs to wake up and take notice. Representation of minorities is a thing, and pull your fingers out of your ass, wake up. And that, I hate to use the word help the cause, because that's not the right thing to say there. But I've heard other commentators speak on that, about that, how that did. It certainly did help cultural representation, and that had cultural representation. When things are helping there, it does have a flow-on effect to help other forms of representation as well. But some interesting studies have been done. Harvard Business Review released a study to show that inclusion and diversity, well, businesses are blowing the trumpet and bringing themselves on the chest, going, yes, we support diversity and inclusion, we're all over it, we support it. When you look closer at that data, only 4% are actually including disability in that diversity and inclusion. So I've seen this anecdotally, whereby businesses are, they either have diversity in their title or whatever it may be, they're supporting diversity and inclusion, but they don't want disability in that diversity and inclusion. So it's the next step that we really have to take to make it not just about diversity and inclusion specifically, not just about diversity and inclusion, but disability specifically, because we are the world's largest minority, and that's UN data, World Health Organization data, not just some random Google facts that I've pulled out of nowhere. So we are the least represented minority in popular culture relative to our proportional size. It makes absolutely no sense that it is the way it is. So it's absolutely wonderful to see that it is on the radar more. But we certainly have a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, that hackneyed phrase is that the journey's just begun, but I'm thankful that at least it has begun, that at least there is a conversation, that you and I are now having this chat, and many, many other people before and after us will have it. I'm also buoyed by every day going out and being able to have the conversation in mainstream industry. Now, the one figure that I always throw in, which starts the conversation with every industry partner I've ever worked with, industry client, is that disability represents $23 trillion across the globe. I mean, the spending power, the ability to be able to influence is extraordinary, but yet it is often not included, as you said, in the conversation. It's often overlooked. And it is also the reality that many products that have been developed from an accessibility inclusive viewpoint turn out to be some of the mainstream's most incredible products, because everybody benefits from them. The understanding and the learning is just, it's viral. It just goes across everything that's done. In part of your conversations with me and others, I've got this feeling that the inclusive language is an important conversation, that it's difficult to understand the appropriate vocabulary for fear of not wanting to say the wrong thing or offend somebody when that's not the intent. What do we say? How do we say? So I'm interested. You've been part of a group that put together, Inclusive Futures at Griffith was also part of that group, a disability reporting handbook.
That's right.
How do you want that to be used? And can you give us an example or two of the learning in there?
Sure. So the Disability Reporting Handbook was put together by Media Diversity Australia, and it was originally designed for journalists who work in newsrooms. And that was put together on the back of the Indigenous Reporting Handbook. And it was put together because journalists, by their nature, don't go out of their way to say or do the wrong thing, but they just need a handbook essentially for the right words to use. And we'd done some research and seen what was out there, and there are, there's information out there, but it's, read my book, read my 10,000 word, and a journalist on a deadline, and having worked in media and having been on deadlines, and I have been in a newsroom, I've been on deadlines, and I don't have time to read a book. I need facts, I need short and sharp. And so a group of working journalists got together with peak disability organisations, people with disabilities, including Dinesh Palapana, who's also at Griffith University, and Jo, who's also at Griffith University. She was our
shout out to both of them. I'm interrupting to give a shout out to both of them. Incredible human beings. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
That's all right. I shout them out as well because they are amazing, and they helped put it all together. So it's really important to have the input from the working journalists and the people with the lived experience. And we put together the handbook so that journalists who are working on a story will use terms such as a wheelchair user instead of wheelchair bound, just those sorts of things, because language does matter, and it has the potential, or not the potential, it does shape social attitudes and public perceptions. And we've had lots and lots of downloads and so much interest from the media, especially since the likes of Dylan Alcott being Australian of the Year, and we're really, really excited to see that it has got a lot of interest from the media. So we also have not lift out, but a page there of short, sharp takeaways. So a journalist who maybe we have the longer version if the journalist does have time for more reading, or if you just want the short, sharp takeaways. And the key to that, or when I say the key, one of the first rules there, the golden rule, is to ask. And the point to that is that every single individual with a disability is unique, even if they have the same disability. So Dinesh Palapana, UQ guy, and we're both in wheelchairs, but we both have very different opinions and views about what language we might like use, for example. So ask us as journalists or as a communications professional, whatever you may be, ask us. And that doesn't mean, I was speaking to somebody the other day, the same rules do not apply if you're a stranger walking through the shopping centre. That doesn't give you the right to just walk up to a random person with a disability and just start asking them their medical history. If you are a journalist or a communications professional and you need an answer to a question, absolutely ask to get the right answer in terms of how would you like to be referred to, or what is the best way to ask you this question, or what is the best way for us to set up the studio to accommodate your wheelchair, or whatever the question may be.
So appreciate the uniqueness of a human being is really what we're saying. I mean, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It just comes back to common core decency, and it shouldn't be different for anybody else. There might be different things that we need to bring into the space to make that more possible for you to engage, but that's all that will be. So it's fascinating to me, because our intersection, where you and I meet, is really around that collaborative nature that you've just spoken about. I, as you, are involved in Griffith's Inclusive Futures Reimagining Disability, which is an alliance that started up earlier this year, an alliance that puts the human-centric need into the centre, that tries to discover through that human-centric need what is it that still needs to be done, thought about, research, developed, and then assembles a group of what I think, I'm totally biased, the most incredible researchers on the planet. To all other researchers, I think you are incredible as well. I'm just biased because of Griffith. And together, they will then begin to search that journey. What's joyous about that is around that, we envelop a community, a really broad community of people, of other people with lived experiences, of people from industry, of people that are allied, of governments of all sorts. And thankfully, one of those core driving teams is you as part of the Engagement Council. It is to make sure that that journey is true to the end user. A champion for the cause is what I'm representing you as, and as fellow traveller is somebody that I think I am as well. So I'm looking forward to that journey with you and to seeing what it is that we can reimagine, which in itself is a difficult word to use in this space. So out of all of that very long introduction, what I was getting at is why your involvement? Why do you think research is important? What do you want to get out of this as part of the Engagement Council?
It's really exciting to be part of the Engagement Council, to be working in such a collaborative team, and co-design as well, to be backed by researchers. And
the research is really taking on the role then of trying to understand what that individual needs, because it's too often the case of the individual actually not knowing what they need. I mean, in the way of being able to enunciate, being able to say something. So this research-led approach, I'm hoping, will actually lead us to faster, if I can use the word better, although I don't really like that, but a faster approach to being able to resolve complex issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I know so often, sometimes I will think this is sort of what I need, but don't quite know how to articulate it or what necessarily needs to be done. But a researcher or an academic can step in and go, oh, I know exactly what that is, and know the answer in his or her jargon, and as a team, we can really nut it out in half the time.
And the joy, of course, is that ability, as you've said, for a researcher to be able to translate the core need when an individual perhaps can't. But the reason I came on board was really the bigger circle, which is where you and I fit in. It's the community that galvanizes around it. It takes the researcher out of a single focus, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They're wonderful people, but often it's a single focus approach that takes many years or many decades of somebody's life, almost a solo type approach, which again is idiosyncratic. But in this sense, it is really bringing a much larger group of people together, laser focused on a particular need that I'm most looking forward to. And I know from our conversations, you are as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think it works the same for me. I know the academics have their bubble, but the disability sector, or I have my bubble as well. And it certainly gets me out of my little disability bubble, working with other people. And I've always said that we work better when we're working collaboratively and working as a team, not necessarily either on our own or in our own little silo. So it's really great to be part of such a collaborative team.
And bursting some bubbles. And really bursting all those bubbles, including things we talked about before, because part of the role that we've all taken on is really to see if we can stretch the conversation, not just amongst ourselves, but into the broader community. If we can, through outreach, begin to give people the opportunity to understand disability and its individualism. That really what we are talking about is human beings, as we all are, with particular needs at particular times, and every single one of us in life has those particular needs at particular times.
That's absolutely right. It's something I've tried to do, and I know others are certainly trying to do as well. Is break down some of that stigma and fear, and we can't do that by staying in our little silo. We need to connect with other people outside our silo about disability, and it's not this big scary thing where you should be afraid to come up and talk to us, and the hope is that if I or somebody else can help break down that fear, that little Johnny or little Susie, that when they grow up to be my age, they won't have to face the challenges and the BS that I've necessarily been living with, and all the awkwardness and people walking on eggshells around me.
Thank you in advance for doing that. I mean, really, that's a really difficult, courageous path to take. So I'm thankful that you've taken it long before we met and long after, we no longer work together as well. I want to now take you into, I work as a foresight strategist. So my entire life has been about trying to imagine tomorrow's landscape for a range of clients. Helping us to get ready for it is the purpose for that. I want us for a moment to think about what euphemistically is called the generation X, Y, Z, and A, those that are yet to come with disability. What do you think they need from us today to get the world ready and as perfect as we can make it for them? So what are younger generations facing disability or with disability wanting from us?
I'm going to say they want answers to solutions. And I know that sounds really obvious and broad, but I take this from the work I'm doing at the moment with businesses, and the work I do at the moment with businesses and brands in terms of advertising and representation. There are a million people telling them they're doing it wrong, and you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. And they're like, yeah, no, will somebody just tell us how to do it right and what to do? Somebody, anybody. And so potentially there could be that same problem with generation A, or the younger generations, if they're coming through. If we repeat that problem with generation A, I'm thinking out loud before I've thought that through properly. So I just don't want to see a repeat of that problem.
So do we need to resource the world in such a way that disability really isn't a conversation?
I would love that. I would love that so much.
You and me both. Hallelujah.
I've said repeatedly over the years that I've been in newspapers and had headlines written about me, and I wish that didn't happen. You know, Lisa has done this, and first disabled person to achieve this. I'm like, that shouldn't be news. You know, it's great that it is. Like, yes, I'm happy to be, you know, for other younger disabled people to see if there has to be representation, then awesome. But I hope that in the future it's no big deal, that it doesn't have to be the first disabled person or a disabled person is doing this. That I shouldn't be a big deal. A disabled person should not be a big deal.
So I think you've actually answered my next and final question.
Okay.
And that is, what is brand disability in 2030?
Integrated seamlessly into brand everything else. Although I would love that. Oh, actually, I was going to say 2030 integrated seamlessly. At the moment, we're not at that stage just yet, so it's a little bit awkward, and there are still press releases being released in Ad News and B&T about so and so is, you know, inclusive advertising campaign, because that's the stage we're at. But I would love to get to the stage where I remember 17 years ago there was no anything, but now there are talent agencies and so producers with disabilities, and it's just brilliant. So I can go to agencies and recommend people and places and all sorts of things. But in 2030, I would like to see it seamlessly integrated so that I don't notice. My husband doesn't have to press pause and go, look at the wheelchair on the TV. I love him for doing that. I absolutely love him. And my sister will send me screenshots of a wheelchair or a disabled person on the TV, like, oh, look. I love them both because they know how passionate I am about representation in pop culture, but I wish they didn't have to.
So maybe that is our wish for the generations ahead, that by 2030 it's ambitious, but certainly by 2030 I think we can be a long way towards doing that. And that's really what I'm hoping will come out of our conversation today. That the people viewing, the people watching and listening will take this conversation into their own homes, into their own workspaces, into their own living spaces, and into their own hearts, and continue it on. Continue to be challenged, continue to challenge others to look at disability as normality, as it absolutely is and should always be. The Disability 2030 should be, well, why is that conversation even happening? But more importantly, that we're celebrating people that are doing extraordinary things like you. And I want to thank you for spending the last few moments with me, chatting about the past, the present and the future of disability. And I'm looking forward very, very much to working with you in Inclusive Futures, to seeing what we can get up with, the mischief we might be able to create together over the next little while, and the way that we might be able to nudge that little needle just a little bit further along where it needs to be. Thank you again very, very much for joining me in conversation.
Thank you, Morris. Thanks very much.